In 1923, a single loaf of bread in Germany cost 200 billion marks. Not a typo, not a joke, just the price of breakfast, written in numbers too long for any wallet to hold. To stay warm, families stopped spending their cash and started burning it. The notes had fallen so far that a thick bundle gave more warmth in the stove than it could buy at the shop. Workers were paid twice a day, then raced to spend it within minutes. Wait an hour, and your wages might buy half as much, so the whole country was always running to the shops. But how does this even happen? How does an entire nation's money slide from solid and trusted to utterly worthless, almost overnight, as if the value simply evaporated? The answer isn't bad luck or some freak accident of history. It's a decision, a series of choices made by people in power, and it's a decision that governments have made again and again across more than 3,000 years of recorded history. To really understand it, we have to go back, way back, to the very first time human beings tried to invent money at all. Before banks, before coins, before paper, there was a simpler problem to solve. And what we'll discover along the way is unsettling. The system we lean on every single day, the money we earn and save and trust without a second thought, was never nearly as solid as it looks. So what is money, really? Strip away the metal, the paper, and the long rows of zeros, and what's left is surprisingly simple. Money is trust. It's a shared agreement, a quiet promise between total strangers that this thing here can reliably be traded for that thing there, nothing more and nothing less. For most of history, that trust was anchored to something real and physical. A coin had value because it was made of gold or silver, metals that were genuinely scarce, difficult to dig out of the earth, and almost impossible to fake. The trust had weight you could hold in your hand. But there was always a temptation. A ruler who needed more money couldn't just conjure gold out of thin air. So instead, they cheated. They melted the coins down, mixed in a little cheaper metal, and quietly minted more of them. Each coin looked the same, but was worth a fraction less than before. Historians have a name for this slow, silent theft: debasement. Then came paper money, and it quietly removed the last natural limit. A banknote has almost no value in itself, it's just printed paper and ink. What it really is a promise, a printed IOU, an official guarantee that the government swears, on its word alone, is worth something real. Which brings us back to Germany. To really understand the chaos of 1923, we can't begin in 1923 at all. We have to rewind almost a full decade, all the way to 1914, to the summer when the First World War broke out, and a proud industrial nation quietly made a fateful financial choice whose consequences would echo for years to come. Germany chose not to pay for the war with taxes. Instead, it paid with borrowed money and the printing press, running up enormous debts. The gamble was simple and reckless: win the war, then force the defeated enemies to pick up the entire bill afterward. It was betting the nation's future on victory, and it was a bet it would lose. But Germany lost the war, and the Treaty of Versailles handed the defeated country a staggering, almost unimaginable bill: reparations of 132 billion gold marks. Gold marks, crucially, not the paper currency Germany could freely print, but a hard, external debt that no printing press could ever simply wish away. The pressure on the young republic was now immense. The mark was already sliding steadily downward. Then, in 1923, Germany fell behind on its reparations payments. In response, French and Belgian troops marched across the border and occupied the Ruhr, the dense industrial heartland where much of the nation's coal, steel, and raw wealth was actually produced. It was, quite literally, the beating engine of the entire economy. In defiance, the German government urged the workers of the Ruhr to stop working altogether as an act of passive resistance against the occupation. and then it promised to keep paying all of their wages anyway. But pay them with what exactly? With freshly printed money, vast mountains of brand new banknotes, conjured from thin air and backed by absolutely nothing at all. And here is the trap that quietly closes shut. More and more money, all chasing the very same limited goods, means that prices simply have to rise. So the government responds in the only way it knows, by printing even more, which makes prices climb even faster, which demands still more printing. It's a vicious spiral that feeds and accelerates itself, and once it truly begins, it is brutally hard to stop. By the autumn of 1923, prices weren't merely rising, they were doubling every few days, and then every few hours. Restaurants were raising their prices while customers were still sitting there eating. Workers were paid in bulging suitcases stuffed with cash, and had to rush out and spend every last note within the hour before it quietly lost its value. At the absolute peak of the madness, a single US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. The numbers had grown so impossibly absurd that money stopped being something you could meaningfully count at all. Instead, shopkeepers and banks simply piled the banknotes onto scales. Money was no longer counted out. It was weighed by the kilogram. And in a collapse on this scale, someone always ends up paying the price. The savers, the pensioners, the careful and frugal middle class, they could only watch as a lifetime of patient saving dissolved into worthless dust, almost overnight. But strangely, there were quiet winners too. Anyone who owed money was suddenly set free because their debts were now worth essentially nothing. In just months, hyperinflation had silently rewritten who was rich and who was poor. But the deepest damage of all wasn't really financial. When a nation's money dies, something far more fragile dies along with it: trust. Trust in the banks, trust in savings, and trust in the basic promises of the state itself. That profound collapse of faith left deep psychological scars across Germany. Scars that lingered for years, long after the prices themselves had finally stabilized. The long-awaited cure finally arrived in November of 1923. A brand new currency was introduced, the Rentenmark, backed this time not by gold, but by a mortgage on the nation's own land and industry. One single new mark was exchanged for 1 trillion of the old, ruined ones. And at last, after years of relentless frenzy, the printing presses finally fell silent. And then, almost overnight, the madness simply stopped. Prices steadied, and at long last they held still. Because here's the strangest part of this entire story. The cure itself was never actually complicated. Stop printing the money, firmly hold the line, and slowly let ordinary people begin to believe in their currency once again. So here is the hard lesson that Germany paid for in full, in suffering and ruin. Money is not the same thing as wealth. Money is only ever a promise. And if you make those promises far faster than you make real, tangible things to back them, then the promise itself eventually dies. And Germany was neither the first to learn this brutal lesson, nor would it be the last. The very same script has played out since then, almost beat for beat, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, and in Hungary. Everywhere, a government quietly decided that printing fresh money was simply easier than actually paying its real bills. Which leaves us with just one final question to sit with. If money really is, at its core, nothing more than trust, then what exactly is the money in your own pocket built on right now? Think about that, and if this made you see those everyday bills a little differently, consider subscribing,